What many people are struggling to understand about Eastern Europe and its issues is that they're not only coming from a rough history or bad management. They are also fueled by bad actors. And while developed and democratic countries loudly proclaim their every move or decision, authoritarians work in the shadows and deny everything. So today we will shed some light on those tactics and ways of influence on the example of Moldova. The recent presidential election saw Maia Sandu, the nation's staunchly pro-European leader, secure another term. However, her victory was hard-won. She faced stiff competition from pro-Russian candidates, forcing a second round of voting. Ultimately, it was the strong support of the Moldovan diaspora that proved decisive both in presidential race and in the referendum of European integration, a referendum championed by Sandu and actively undermined by the Kremlin. With parliamentary election looming next year, pro-European forces face an uphill battle to retain control, as pro-Russian sentiment continues to hold sway amongst many within Moldova itself. Today, we'll examine how those sympathetic to the Kremlin have stymied the country's European aspiration for years. Some of you might scoff at those aspirations. After all, too many are unhappy with the inefficiencies of the EU. Unfortunately, complete independence and self-reliance are rarely possible. And at the end of the day, you have to choose. So what is really happening in Moldova? And what can we learn from their fight for a better future with no extremes? Just before the first round of Moldova's presidential election, major Western media predicted an easy victory for the incumbent, Maia Sandu, over her rival Stoyanoglu. Despite this, many voted in favor of Stoyanoglu, a former pro-Russian prosecutor general once suspected of corruption, but later cleared by the European Court of Human Rights. Sandu ultimately won, largely thanks to the diaspora, which gave her 80% of its vote. The campaign saw a fierce battle between pro-European and pro-Russian forces. On the eve of the election, Moldova's security service reported at least 130,000 Moldovans were on Russia's payroll. Meanwhile, the police revealed that Russians had transferred 39 million to their citizens via a Moldovan bank in just 2 months. Social media was flooded with fake news and conspiracy theories, including claims that the EU and NATO sought to drag Moldova into war, foreigners would buy up Moldovan land, and children would be indoctrinated with gay values. The constitutional referendum on EU integration worried the Kremlin even more than the election itself. Although Moldova didn't need to amend its constitution, the referendum served as a tactic to boost voter turnout. Russian influence also promoted the anonymous group Not Now, claiming to support EU membership but insisting it was premature. The results in Chisinau were striking. The capital, expected to be staunchly pro-European, gave only 56% of its vote to Europe. At the start of the Russian-Ukrainian war, Moldova frequently made headlines. Fears of becoming Russia's next target were widespread. While the failure of Russia's offensive on Ukraine's Odessa region ruled out a ground attack, the threat of coup remains. Ukrainian intelligence warned President Maia Sandu about potential sabotage. These concerns seemed justified, as anti-government rallies in Chisinau persisted for months. Organizers openly admitted that the 10 protesters were bribed, offering participants between 400 and 1,200 lei to push for the government's overthrow. This hybrid warfare tactic, however, is not new for Moldova. It dates back to its independence. The prime example is Transnistria. In the 90s, this breakaway region became the blueprint for later separatist projects, like Abkhazia or so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. Russia used Transnistria to refine its methods of disguising occupation as peacekeeping and combating imaginary fascists.
Эту благодатную землю легла
The conflict claimed over 1,200 lives and resulted in a flawed 92 peace agreement that froze the situation. Transnistria became a hub for smuggling, from arms export to alcohol pipelines under the Dniester River. Today, no country recognizes Transnistria. Its only alliance are with the Commonwealth of Unrecognized States, a Russian-backed club for separatist regions. Transnistrian documents are invalid internationally, so locals often carry Moldovan, Ukrainian, Russian, or Romanian passports, or even all five. This identity chaos extends to its currency, which features figures like Russia's Catherine II and Suvorov alongside Ukraine's Khmelnytsky and Shevchenko. The dominant identity here isn't Moldovan, Ukrainian, or Russian. It's Soviet. Transnistria clings to its USSR roots with collective farms named after Lenin, hammer and sickle emblem, and valid Soviet passports. How does this fossil of the past survives? Surely no surprise here, all thanks to free gas from Russia. Both of the power plants that existed in Moldova at the time remained in the occupied Russian territories. They are using Russian gas to produce electricity sold back to Chisinau. Absurdly, but for over 30 years, Moldova has funded its own separatist region by buying this electricity. Under Maia Sandu, Moldova began breaking free from this energy dependence. But Gazprom is speculating on Moldova's still high vulnerability. It doesn't ask Transnistria to pay for gas consumption, rather puts all debt on Chisinau, which according to Russian calculations stands at 709 million. Moldova has said its debt is 8.6 million. The Shor party and its leader, Shor, are the main mouthpieces of Russian propaganda in Moldova. Shor is infamous for stealing €1 billion from the state budget, fleeing to Israel, and continuing to destabilize Moldova from abroad. Currently in Moscow, he supports Maia Sandu's main opponent, Alexander Stoyanoglu. Shor's approach is blatant populism, with promises like abolishing utility bills or giving pensioners unlimited free medicine, with no intention or ability to implement those promises. Because when Interpol is looking for you, there is no chance of returning. His party organized anti-government rallies filled with pro-Kremlin rhetoric, including chants about Nazis and fascists.
Эти люди озвучивают типичные нарративы российской пропаганды.
Хорошо, а если нацисты, фашисты, бандеровцы, все вот эти с Америки, великобританцы, если все эти нацики, которые полностью уничтожают каждого там мирного жителя.
The biggest threat from the Shor party, however, isn't in Chisinau or even Transnistria. It's in Gagauzia. This pro-Moscow region, home to an 80% ethnic Gagauz population, is another point of tension. The Gagauz are a Turkic-speaking people granted autonomy in the 90s to preserve their culture. Instead, decades of Russian media influence have led to near-total Russification. In recent election, pro-Russian forces dominated, campaigning with gimmicks like concert by Russian pop stars, who likely only recently learned of Gagauzia's existence. Why does Moscow invest so heavily in this small region? Gagauzia, unlike Transnistria, has legitimate autonomy within Moldova, giving it real leverage over Chisinau. It's a powerful tool for disrupting pro-European policies and hindering Moldova's progress, all under the guise of local governance. The Russian-backed enclaves in Moldova are dragging the country into stagnation. Decades of political chaos have left Moldova among Europe's poorest and the most corrupt nations. However, under Maia Sandu's presidency, Moldova has made yearly progress in corruption perception rankings, climbing to 76 out of 180 countries in 2023. Despite this, poverty remains high, providing ammunition for Sandu's opponents. Resolving the root issues is far from simple. In 30 years, Moldova's parliament has never officially recognized Transnistria as occupied, even after Council of Europe designated Transnistria as a Russian-occupied territory. This stance may seem surprising, but Moldova has never controlled Tiraspol, and many Moldovans reject the idea of losing Transnistria because they never truly had it. Public demand for reclaiming the territory, especially by military means, is minimal. Both the government and citizens favor dialogue over confrontation. The military solution to Transnistria status is unrealistic. A more plausible path to reintegration lies in Russia's economic decline. Transnistria relies entirely on free Russian gas, fostering wasteful habits like the lack of insulated buildings in Tiraspol. When Moscow can no longer afford to subsidize the region, Transnistria's so-called independence will collapse. This scenario benefits Moldova and Ukraine, as the existence of this separatist enclave remains a major obstacle in their EU membership aspirations. In addition to the prospect of traditional EU membership, Moldovans have long debated a plan B, unification with Romania. This idea has logical roots. The two nations share deep historical and cultural ties, along with a common language. Recent constitutional changes recognizing Romanian as a state language are not an attempt to suppress Moldovan identity. Instead, they reflect historical truth. Linguists agree the Moldovan language is not a separate language but a dialect. It was artificially created during Soviet rule by adapting Romanian to Cyrillics and adding Russism to emphasize a false divide between Moldovans and Romanians. Recognizing Romanian as the state language restores historical accuracy. Unsurprisingly, Moldovan communists strongly oppose this decision. But the discussion around reunification goes deeper. Support for merging the two nations has grown significantly, with polls showing that almost half of Moldovans favor the idea. Even pop culture reflects this sentiment. Moldovan bands singing at Eurovision had lyrics about a train from Chișinău to Bucharest that is rushing either through one country or through two. Despite growing support, unification would be challenging to achieve. Redrawing borders after World War II is rare and politically sensitive. The economic disparities between the two countries also complicate matters. Moldova would add millions of citizens to Romania, a demographic benefit, but resulting drop in GDP would strain resources. Legal hurdles add another layer of difficulty. Romania is a NATO member, while Moldova's constitution enshrines neutrality. Aligning their legal frameworks would be a complex and lengthy process. While the idea of unification is gaining traction and remains possible, it is unlikely to happen soon. For now, Moldova's path towards classic European integration seems more achievable. In a recent non-binding referendum, 50.5% of Moldovans voted in favor of joining the European Union. The narrow margin came amid allegation of Russian interference. Shor announced plans to challenge the results. Notably, he made this declaration during an interview with Russia's top propagandist Solovyov. Moldova and Ukraine were granted EU candidate status over 2 years ago. Traditionally, the EU admits countries in regional blocs, and Moldova and Ukraine are no exception. This approach promotes efficiency but ties their progress together. Both nations must fulfill their reform commitments to move forward. Moldova, however, appears determined not to fall behind. While Moldova's EU aspirations are clear, its NATO prospect remains uncertain. The reintegration of separatist Transnistria complicates the possibility of joining the alliance. A 2023 poll showed that 24% of Moldovans support NATO membership, while 62% oppose it. Despite this, Moldova is strengthening its ties with NATO. Since joining the Partnership for Peace program in '94, the country has avoided full membership but embraced cooperation. President Maia Sandu recently admitted that Moldova lacks a combat-ready military, but they significantly increased their defense budget. The Moldovan parliament criminalized separatism, a move that could pave the way for an economic blockade of Transnistria and eventual reintegration. Moldova is also fighting Russian influence. The government has shut down Russian channels, created a blacklist of Russian individuals banned from entry, and joined the coalitions for an international tribunal on Russian war crimes. While these measures come late, they signal a long overdue shift in Moldova's approach to sovereignty and security. If you felt uneasy about such measures and censorship of free Russian speech, let us know in the comments if you want a bigger view of the inner workings of Russian propaganda machine. Maybe some of your worries might be put to rest. The positive changes in Moldovan politics are encouraging, but it's too soon to celebrate. Pro-Russian forces still have the funds to organize anti-government protests and show no signs of stopping. Meanwhile, Moscow is unlikely to relinquish Transnistria or allow Moldova to move closer to the EU without a fight. As long as it has resources, Russia will continue to target Moldova with hybrid threats. Europe's role is crucial. Strengthening soft power and diplomacy in this vulnerable but friendly state is essential. Supporting Moldova in countering Kremlin influence and guiding it towards democracy aligns with Europe's interests in the ongoing struggle between democracy and dictatorship. If you found our review too extreme and too judgmental of Russia, likely you are not fully realizing the scale of its reach. Full-scale invasion overstretched their resources and slowly but steadily leading to collapse. But that can take time. So meanwhile, we need to be prepared and have better understanding of the threats coming from autocratic regimes. Join us on this journey. Subscribe and see you soon.
Ребят, показываю вам, как правильно проезжать пост в Приднестровье. Открываете окна на максималку и включаете вашу любимую музыку. Ось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми нашу славну Україну розвеселимо. Ой, у лузі червона. Что случилось, ребят?
Информация поступила, съемки телефона.
И что? Я у себя в стране нахожусь. И что хочу, то и снимаю. Какие вопросы ко мне?
Вы не снимаете военнослужащих. На территории поста...
Так ты ко мне подошел. И хочешь, чтобы я тебя не снимал?
Она не снимается.
Кто сказал? Есть Конституция Республики Молдовы. Я нахожусь на территории Республики Молдовы. И буду поступать так, как считаю нужным. Какие вопросы ко мне еще есть?
На территории поста не снимается. Вы можете снимать.
Я задержан или что? Ты что меня остановил вообще?
Конечно.
Что, конечно?
Я вам объясняю, на территории поста видеосъемка не снимается.
Я нахожусь у себя в машине. У себя в стране.
Я понимаю.
Все, какие ко мне вопросы?
Ну, вы не знаете, что на территории поста видеосъемка
Какого
запрещена?
поста? Вы что здесь вообще стоите, я не понимаю.
Почему
Ты гражданин какой страны?
России.
Ну, а я гражданин Молдовы, я нахожусь в Молдове,
Ну,
понятно?
мы все вместе
Все,
стоим.
давайте разбежались, и я поехал дальше.